great. So, so the programme this evening, we'll hear three composers, Simon Hellewell, myself, and Ruta Vikauskaite. Sorry, I'm really not sure how to pronounce that name. I always have to. Do you want to help me out? Ruta.
Vikauskaite.
Sorry?
Ruta Vikauskaite.
Okay, I'm not going to attempt that. I'm sorry. But lovely, thank you. So the theme for tonight's forum is control, interpreting the abstract and the concrete. And we have a selection of pieces that all deal with this concept in different ways. And I'm sure it's going to be very interesting to hear the different composers' thoughts. And after they've introduced themselves and their work, we'll hear a recording of it. And then we encourage you to ask questions, make use of the chat function, or raise your hand, which I think is in the bottom toolbar. So because it's just not always possible to see, if someone's trying to make a point, it's not always possible to see. So sometimes that's really useful. And we just want to make it as interactive as possible. So, but please ensure that during the recording, during the actual showcase of people's works, that your microphones are muted, because that can interfere with the sound. Great. So first of all, let's move on to Simon, who's going to be showcasing his work. Could you just tell us a bit about the piece, people that performed in it, and just introduce yourself as a composer?
I mean, I'll do that as all as part of my talk, I think, to some extent. But I wrote a piece called Shattered Glass. It was for the excellent ensemble, the Vonnegut Collective, along with a graphic artist called Laura Orton. I will show a full presentation on this, but I will need to be host. Thank you. So, if I get the correct... There we go, Shattered Glass. So I'm Simon, I'm a PhD composer at the University of Manchester, just about finishing up right now, writing up and everything. I'm discussing Shattered Glass, questions of control in my recent work. So Shattered Glass was the last piece of in-person music making that I had before lockdown started. So I feel like it's in some ways very recent, although it's sort of actually over a year ago now that I was actually working on this piece. But before I actually talk much about the piece itself, I'm going to talk a bit about my creative practice leading up towards this piece. So following a cool shattering glass transition, we're going to get into some context. So, as is maybe evidenced by the image currently on screen, my recent practice involves the creation of what could be called graphic scores. My works tend to involve a fair amount of traditional notation along with graphic elements, especially often using unusual shapes for the score. These are often a starting point for the actual music itself, and will impact the approaches that I take to the music and how I structure the music around a shape that may or may not give a clear start or end point. This actually became a thrust of my research because of an interest in recording music. In the 21st century, we have perfect definitive recordings of works. In essence, the essence of a work can be made to be so much more than it could actually ever really be live in some ways. And I actually like the potential provided by that fixity. However, it's meant that when approaching a piece of music for live performance, I want to embrace that liveness and accentuate the decisions being made and freedoms being utilised by performers in the moment. So my first attempt at a graphic score, as on the screen, was in 2017 with this piece, Perception Check. in which the 2D shapes on each of the pages of the score is tied to the side of some of these polyhedral dice, which may be familiar to people who are used to Dungeons and Dragons. So the rolling of the dice would direct what the music would do next. It would direct from, say, the 20-sided page to the 4-sided page, in a manner that does, again, loosely follow the combat mechanics of Dungeons and Dragons. And this piece, with the shape of the dice influencing the shape of the score, and in turn the structure of the piece and what it would be about, was a really important and big foundational step as an experiment for me as a composer. But I quickly determined that performer freedoms were probably of more interest to me in general, and would likely create more engaging and meaningful results. So I moved from handing control over to dice and began exploring performer freedoms. This is characterized in many pieces, so I'll only give a couple of short examples. In this piece, Faraday Tower, the players are playing from parts which function relative to each other, with players dominant and subservient to each other at different points and with different levels of freedom. The violinist begins the piece by following one of these sort of lightning bolts onto this grid, and follows whatever direction they wish on a whim. Of course, there's a lot going on with notation, which I will not unpack just now. And they are continuously playing and moving where they wish until the clarinet player decides that it's time to move on, and cues all players to move to this earth section at the bottom of the screen. And so there's somebody trying to come in, so I'm trying to admit them, not with much success. There we go. So then, once they have been settled on this earth section at the bottom of the page, the violinist waits on that repeated note for a while, and then will go down a fresh lightning bolt and start the whole process again. So it creates this cyclic structure. So in this way, the different performers at different points in the piece have control over when they move and what the time at which they move forward in the structure. And in a similar way, the performers have control over each other, or at least impact each other directly in my piece for orchestra, called, I just realised that I did not move this forward, called Paraboli. Now, like Perception Check, Paraboli is something of a game piece. The performers are given a piece of resonant metal percussion and a series of musical cells to play in order, as I've shown on the score here. They must sound their percussion before playing a cell, and can only play their cell if their percussion did not sound at the same time as anybody else's. Otherwise, they must try again. While I was clear that it should not be raced musically, the mechanic of the piece is essentially a race to play all of your material. The performers have a lot of notational freedom, and on the surface have a lot of choice in what they play, and when they play. Well, yeah, more when they play than what they play. However, they're also controlled by each other in whether or not they have their way in playing at the time that they would like to. So, I'll now turn to the sort of more traditional control dynamics at play in composition. Oh, there we go. So, those of a composer controlling the players. Because when you talk about control, I've said here, I did not come to questions about control. Questions about control came to me. Because I know what most Western tradition composers are thinking upon seeing a lot of these pieces, because so many of them have asked me about it and said this so many times, that they say, I could never do that. I'm too much of a control freak. But am I really letting go of control? Am I not a control freak? Perhaps relatively speaking not, but it's an interesting question when put into perspective within the school of experimental music. So if you look at behind this particularly open score of mine from back in December, and here's a quote from John Cage, saying, "It's therefore very helpful if one has decided that sounds are to come into their own rather than being exploited to express sentiments or ideas of order. which is clearly a far more transcendentalist attitude to sound or music than I managed to have. And here a quote from Joaquin Benitez saying, "The far-reaching aesthetic consequences brought about in experimental music by relinquishing intentionality and letting the sounds be themselves result in works of music that are no longer compositions in the sense of delimited objects, but processes that through a performing activity become sound." And here's, I think, a quote that he takes from Earl Brown here. "A performance is composed rather than a composition is performed." And that's a quote that I often find myself coming back to. And in this context, I sit in a much more unusual and interesting place. In order to create overarching structures that provide a piece a sense of intentionality when the precise order of musical events hasn't been predetermined, I do keep control. I provide musical material. I dictate how that material will function, but instructions and to use their own experience to create a performance that will clearly be that particular piece. So to some extent that last quote is still quite relevant. A performance is composed rather than a composition is performed. I do find some excellent analogies here in a book by the anthropologist Tim Ingold called Making, where he says, he talks in some depth about the relationship actually between architecture and masonry in medieval times. His handy summary of this relationship reads, "The rules followed by medieval cathedral builders could not and did not prescribe their practice in every detail, but instead allowed scope for action to be precisely fine-tuned in relation to the exigencies of the situation at hand." This to me is a very apt, actually, explanation and summary even of my own practice. Now, actually, back to the point at hand with Shattered Glass. I'll also just admit this new participant, if I can. For some reason my cursor isn't showing up, so I'm just kind of going blind. There we go. Great. So this is the score for Shattered Glass, which you've now had a few seconds to look at. It's made of 3 different colours of card that have been glued onto thick grey board and cut into fragments that are intended to loosely resemble broken stained glass, with clear fault lines that have split off in different directions. On these, notation and prompts for musical sounds have been drawn with particular sound worlds associated with each colour. So we have yellow, which is mostly built around harmonics and players singing while playing. Sometimes that will be sung through the instrument, sometimes sung at the same time as playing. We've got red, which is popping sounds and attacks and staccato notes, often on a single pitch, so a lot of quite short sounds marking that sound world. And we've got the blue page, which is kind of varying a lot between quite clear pitches and quite obscured pitches. So these fragments were spread evenly across the music stands of the members of Vonnegut Collective, and the performance was in a concert with a theme of shape and sound, in collaboration with graphic designer Laura Orton. Through the performance, Laura was to take pieces from the performers and create a design in the centre of the stage, which was projected on the screen through filters of 3 different colours. The 5th person on stage, beautifully modelled here by Ruben, was at a laptop selecting the colour of filter on the screen. The instrumentalists were required to only play fragments of the same colour as that shown on screen. So I think that gives enough of an idea of what's actually going on here. So let's watch the performance. So, as a sort of final note, I'd just like to take a look at the dynamics of control in Shattered Glass, which we just heard, and who has control. So the players have some choice in the material they choose, and a lot of freedom in interpretation. Laura could limit the pool of material and could even silence a player mid-phrase by removing the material. The person at the laptop can choose the sound world, and as the available material becomes scarce, can even switch players on and off, or force them to repeat phrases. And then, of course, myself as the composer, I selected the available sound materials and the instructions. And this creates an interesting dynamic. The sound result of the performance is contingent upon the agency and interplay of all the parties involved. Rather than being a hidden fact of the music, these relationships are played out on stage as the piece develops. So by making these elements of control performative, there is an intentionality behind the work and its division of control and process. Perhaps too little intentionality to say that a composition is performed, and just enough to say that a performance is composed. And thank you for listening. Very limited bibliography of just the things I've made reference to. And I can stop sharing now.
That was absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Simon. Yeah, I'm just, wow, it's such an interesting concept, the idea of just giving multiple, people involved the control. Like, that's a concept I've never come across before, so it's really fascinating. In terms of, well, I suppose I'd like to open this out to anyone who has questions first, and I'll ask mine later. So does anyone have any questions for Simon at this stage?
Looks like Ruben does.
Question?
Yes. Ruben here.
Hi.
Yep. Hi.
Hello, Ruben has a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Listening.
Well, it's a comment and then a question.
That's the classic.
As all of you are undoubtedly aware, the idea of determining the composition of a specific piece using dice is very old. In the 18th century, it was a favorite pastime. Mozart, who loved games of all kinds, you did that, but also he wrote a piece of music consisting of a number of fragments in which the order would be determined by keywords. And one of the keywords was Florence. I will not bother you with this because I'm sure you're aware of it, but any of you who would be interested in finding out what Mozart did with this, send me an email and I'll be happy to send you the link to the particular article. The question goes to the very beginning of what you said, the recordings. You said something along the lines of perfect performance or something like that.
In inverted commas, yes.
Okay. What do you mean by perfect? Do you mean technically, musically, conceptually? Because I'm as old as a few of you put together, and I have many decades of performance as instrumentalist and conductor. In my own case, and in the case of many colleagues, we have never achieved a perfect performance, either live or in recording. There are typical cases where I still have to hear a performance by myself or anyone else, where, for instance, the rhythm in the first movement of Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, ta 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 ta, is actually rendered accurately. For technical reasons, after a few bars, and instead of ta 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 ta, and that ends up being a duple, ta 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 ta. So, going back to my question, what do you mean by perfect?
I mean, I put perfect very much intentionally in inverted commas because it's an entirely subjective thing. But my thinking around it is more that with the ability to multi-track and sit in a studio with a player for days on end, potentially, to actually get what you deem to be the right take. There's an idea that I feel that you can achieve more. Obviously, it's a very different matter when you're working with orchestra because there's so many things going on and they all will typically be there at once. But on a smaller scale, you can multi-track everything with a click track and create something that is more or less exactly whatever you imagined. And ultimately, maybe perfect is not the right word, but definitive is definitely the word, because then what you can do with a new composition is fix it precisely to be exactly this way, and that is going to be the definitive version of that piece for all time.
Wouldn't a better word then be accurate and not definitive? Because I don't think that what you consider definitive about a piece now, you would consider definitive 3 months from now or 3 years from now. Your thoughts would be continuing to evolve about any particular piece. And what you think of a performance, yes. I think we can all say this comes very close or almost identical to my concept of what this piece should be at this point. Hopefully, my concept 6 months from now is not going to be the same. Anyway, that's a comment. Sorry.
And other questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah. Okay, go.
All right. Hey. Yeah. So you talk a lot about the concept of giving performers freedom, and speaking as someone who's who would say they're an improviser first, composer second, I guess I kind of have an issue with people that say they're giving control to performers and say it as if this is like some kind of radical new idea that not that many composers have thought of before, because personally I really don't think that's the case. I can list a whole bunch of
It's not the case.
Yeah.
It's not. I'm not saying that nobody has ever done this before. In fact, one of the things that I was quite careful to observe on very early on was that, you know, on the scale of things within experimental music, I'm not, and a significant part of my research has been finding where I fit within the broader world of this exact kind of area, which is so broad, but it's an interesting one because it's very broad within what's also manages to be actually quite a sort of niche sometimes within contemporary music in terms of Western music and sort of following the more classical tradition. So it's kind of, it's interesting trying to find a sort of middle ground of where I fall within that and in relation to all those people.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and I think I sort of say this because you know, you look at people like Tyshawn Sorey, Anthony Braxton, and then kind of like younger people like Chris Pitsiokis, kind of playing around with it. And I think what's kind of interesting is that they kind of approach it from being kind of improvisers first. So and I see a lot of I do see a lot of people that kind of look at this as sort of like a wing of like aleatoric music, and I feel like it's kind of those kind of pieces are kind of like much more than that. I'm probably not articulating it that well, but I think you get what I'm trying to say. Sort of,
yes. But I'm not sure I have much of a response to it beyond that. Yeah, that is an interesting thing with this type of thing, is that people are approaching it from both sides, and that also makes it very kind of strange to write about and talk about, because it's I don't know. I think I would need a lot more time to go into how I think my background leading into and the way that I found my way into this area has impacted how I view it and conceive of it.
Yeah, totally. Like context always kind of helps these sort of things. Yeah, thanks a lot.
No problem.
Yeah, so we have two people, who, Ruta and Ronnie. Who wants to go first?
I can go first. There is also Jake Adams raising hand. I don't know if you can see, but yeah. Anyway, I wanted to say that I really like the visual side of those scores, and it looks like for me it looks like a really fun thing to play. But I speak as a performer, as a composer. I actually wonder. Do you imagine the end result of this? Do you imagine the overall, how it will sound, the form and the music itself? And if you do, to what degree do you imagine that? And if you don't imagine this, if you don't think about this end result in such terms as a continuous piece, then I wonder actually, how do you justify for yourself selection of musical material? I mean, how do you decide this or that? Because then it can be, there is lots of choice, isn't it, to make?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting one. And I think the key is to the kind of second half of your opening question there, which is to what extent do I picture this in advance? Because I definitely do have an idea of what I expect it to kind of sound like, and I definitely have an idea of the kind of sounds and how I want some of them to kind of blend. I want to have some direction over the structure of the piece, and that means a certain amount of having to take control and ownership of the sound materials. So yeah, and that was actually really impacted very early on in the whole process of this, when I had a lengthy conversation in Lithuania with Daniel Nelson, sort of around finding ways to find structure, and it's, yeah, I don't know, I'm trying to find the correct words for the rest of it, but I think it's always been the case, and the reason I found my way here was I started out initially just still having point A to point B pieces where I would try to where I would just loosen up the rhythm so much, because I didn't mind if this note happened at this particular point in time. I cared more that it happened relative at a point in time to this other sound that was happening. And then it just kind of gradually loosened from there. And a lot of my PhD has been exploring a wide range of approaches there, actually, rather than just kind of having one view of what I'm trying to achieve. I'm kind of trying out lots of different things. So I'm still kind of figuring that out. And I've tried a range of different things, but I don't know, I'm getting there to finding my spot. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting idea about kind of composing the piece almost as you imagine the end result, but you only compose halfway through, and then let people choose the rest.
But it's sort of, there's so much that is going to be the same across different performances, and there's so much that isn't. And I think that's the interesting thing to me, is trying to find that balance where there's definitely a lot of stuff in there that's unexpected, and there's a lot in there that's actually is expected. And I think a lot of it for me comes down to really where I've kind of given up on trying to think about in terms of what the ideal kind of performance is, where I don't try and think of it in terms of, yes, I want this to sound exactly this way, because it goes against the point of what I'm trying to do. So I've kind of started more in thinking about it about being the engagement with the performer. So if it's about kind of really kind of letting the performer find their own creativity through the piece. And that's more, perhaps in some ways, more exciting to me than the actual end result of the sound. Anyway, I think Ronnie has been waiting very politely since the very start of the session.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, thanks very much for that. It sounded really interesting. I mean, the sounds I found were very interesting. Like, it sounded like it had musicality. I'm sorry I came just a little bit late to hear all of your explanation, but I was lucky enough to make it to hear the whole piece. Just for the questions related to what Ruta said about the structure and that. But I just wanted to ask first, what were the parameters that you were giving to the performers? You listed them before, I think, at the end, but you had a shattered glass thing on with different musical fragments, yeah?
Yes.
Arranged with different types of notes, like short pieces, were they? The short
really.
sorry, short.
Very varied across all.
I don't mean, sorry, short notes or long notes and things like that. That's how you organised it, wasn't it?
It was very varied. I tried to explore quite a range within what I had. So this is just from the pieces that I'd given to the violin in this performance, which as of last Wednesday, I finally have in my possession again. They've been locked in my locker in Manchester since March last year.
Oh, wow.
So I've got some things where I've got a number of notes, along with some instructions of how to go about playing them.
Right. Repeat, ad-lib, clear pitch.
Ad-lib with clear pitch, and then an arrow down to obscure pitch, and then an arrow down to clear pitch. So notes, but with a hint of how to go about expressing them.
And does that apply to all instruments, or is that only to
this is just what's on the stand of one person.
And so can anyone get that, or
you can scatter these around between all of them?
So any instrument can play that then, yeah?
For that performance, I selected them thinking what might work best with what instrument, but it was very approximate. Anyone could have got anything, really.
Right. So the same instructions and notes can be applied to anyone.
Yeah, so it's all loose enough that any of them could have played it, but obviously some of the sounds might be a bit different based on the instrument that they're playing.
So you also chose instruments that were in a particular range then, yeah? So that they can all play the same range of notes?
Yes.
Not double bass.
I did keep it within I kept it within the instruments that I was expecting to work with, although I think I did have a caveat in the instructions that but different changing octaves, it would be allowed.
Right. I think in C, isn't it? Terry Riley's allows
sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
Everything's written in a treble clef and within the range of those instruments, but I think it's more interesting and worthwhile and allows more potential for people to realize it in different ways. If they
can do it themselves, right? And are the and they can they appear in any order then in the piece?
Yes.
Right.
So their performers are being controlled by the color that's on the screen. Mm-hmm. The sort of that video feed is being fed through, so they're having to choose their fragments based on the color that's on the screen.
Right.
So then I'm sitting at the computer in that performance, basically determining what kind of sound world from those colors.
Right. And so the colors were short notes, were they, or
different? Each color had its own sound world. So the yellow was a mix of harmonics and singing and playing for the most part. The red was generally short notes. Mm-hmm. The red was pretty much all sort of short notes and sort of particular types of attack.
Right.
And the blue was a lot of largely I can't remember, there are two things, but one of them is particularly kind of obscure, playing between obscure and clear pitch.
Right. So okay. So
I'd love to continue this, but I think we might be a bit over time.
Yeah, I was just gonna. I mean, the question I wanted. I'm sorry. I'm sure you explained that already. The question I wanted to ask was, so all these. So you're basically controlling the structure in terms of what kind of sound overall quality of sound we're hearing in a particular moment. What I wanted to ask was how it's how when you're playing it several times, what kind of different structures appear, or is it a similar sort of thing?
It's going to come down to the person at the laptop, and that doesn't necessarily have to be me.
Right.
And
right.
what they're feeling on at the time. The one thing that will be consistent is that there'll be that gradual lessening of the pool of available material. So you'll get that sort of, all of them are playing bits and pieces here and there at the start, and gradually there'll be more and more kind of cut apart.
Okay.
Kind of broken up.
Right. Very interesting. Well, thank you very much.
No problem. I'll pass over to Eliorah, I think, to take over now. So I'll let her be host again.
Thank you. That's great. Okay. Thanks so much, Simon. That was really interesting. I'm just going to, I don't really have a presentation for my piece, but just introduce myself. I'm in Eliorah, and I'm a composer, also graduate from the University of Manchester, recently graduated from a master's degree in composition, and I'm just generally interested in sort of different mechanisms, like different systems, and like both in nature but also sort of artificial systems, like this particular piece that I'm showcasing today is called the Wind-Up Piano, and it's based on the mechanism of a clock of the first early watches of George Harrison. And I basically draw a sort of parallel between the different systems that are in place within the clockwork mechanism of the early watches, and the sort of different systems that are like possible to manipulate on a grand piano. So I have a player or a percussionist who operates the exposed strings on the inside of the piano, and a player who operates the keyboard. So it's like the outer system and an inner system, which sort of is a sort of allegorical for the way a clock kind of mechanism works. So originally, I'll just share my screen actually for a second, and then I think I might just post the score here on the chat, because it doesn't seem to work for me to share my screen at the same time as my sound. Sorry, it won't be a long. Okay, actually, I can't find it. I'm just going to share it now. So what I've got here is 5 staves, which all sort of illustrate the. I'll just show you the. Sorry. So I've got the different parts of the piano. So I've labelled them, the different segments of the inner strings, with different numbers. So the higher numbers are smaller. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the fifth one is the smallest, so the highest pitch, and then it goes 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and that's basically those different staves are used for the different segments of the piano, and that's how the performer knows whereabouts to play on the keyboard. And this was done for technical reasons, partly because of the beams getting in the way of the actual instrument, but also because I wanted to have a certain limited amount of control, it sort of limit the, like, amount of control that the sort of like sort of the range of pitches is played on. So yeah, I'll just play it to you now. Yeah, so this originally was performed at the Martin Harris Centre with pianist Maria Palapanidou, and is also a PhD composer at the University of Manchester, and George Bingham, who is a percussionist at the University of Manchester. So this, I'll just share my audio now. Sorry. This is the piece. So that was it. Sorry about the mess up with the score. I couldn't work out how to put it up at the same time. But I think thank you, Atafe, for posting it in the group chat. Are there any questions about it? I'm not sure whether I explained it very well.
Hello. I don't have a question. I have only a comment. First of all, bravo. I think it's a wonderful piece. You also certainly know your Sacre de Printemps as far as what rhythms you use and the repetitive rhythms. But I really enjoyed it. I think it's extremely creative. And you have managed to incorporate a number of different elements that don't necessarily need to go together, but you created what, in my opinion, is a wonderful piece. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate that.
Yes, Jake.
Yeah, amazing piece. I just had a kind of a practicality question, because you mentioned that it was a percussionist playing the inside the piano parts. And I was wondering, do you think you could get that effective a performance from a non-percussionist? Because it was all very, I'm not quite sure how to say this. It felt very kind of very much like a percussion part rather than necessarily a part for a pianist to play.
Oh yes. I'm sorry, I didn't mention that. It's actually meant for a percussionist.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned this earlier actually. The original concept for the piece was I was really inspired by santur technique. So the Persian santur uses mezrabs, and I was just really fascinated by Persian rhythms, and I realized that the Persian rhythms were very much determined by the technique of the santur itself and the way that you need to alternate between the hands. And so a lot of the rhythms and the contours themselves were determined by that technique, and which is why I actually specified in the score. I know it's a bit confusing because it says piano duet, but it is actually meant for one pianist and percussionist. So yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for bringing it up.
No worries.
I mentioned that.
Yes, Catherine.
Hey, I really love the piece. It's really cool. I love the effect, like of having like that kind of like a percussionist and a pianist at the same time. It works really well. How did you come up with just like the idea that, because the Mesrab are so incredibly light, I would never have guessed that you could get like any volume out of a piano from them. I just wouldn't have thought, because then like a piano isn't designed, like it's designed to be hit by rather heavy hammers. Like just kind of what was the process of like thinking and experimenting with that?
Oh yeah, I should mention actually, Atafe played a big role in helping me devise this piece, because I just like suggested it to her one day. I was just like, what would it sound like if we actually played inside? And I don't know why, I don't know where it came from. I just thought that would be so cool. So I asked her to, just try out different things, and we just experimented in one of the practice rooms, and I realized that using the pedal, I control the pedaling really carefully throughout the piece because I want to control the resonance. And I realized that it's really fascinating to see how you can sort of bring different layers to the foreground. So using the sustaining pedal, the strings that you hit with the mezrab are much louder than the notes that you play on the keyboard, for instance. So it's just things like that which just really fascinated me when we experimented. We had some photos of us just like sort of with underneath the keyboard, like sort of tapping from below on the we had so much fun. But yeah, so yeah, credit definitely goes to Atafe as well with that.
It is really great. I also had a technical question on just because I've written a piece before that did use like the inside of the piano, and I found that I had issues because I had written specific pitches, whereas you've not written specific pitches for the inside of the piano, and I found like the iron frame varies a lot from piano to piano. So like, is that something like?
Yeah, that's something I had to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point actually. So what I did was I had a look at all the different instruments and I just thought, okay, so what is possible? So I said in the notes that some of them have beams that section it off into 4 sections, and I sort of specified you should be like careful, like that you should look at the beaming within the piano first and sort of kind of make your own kind of rational conclusion about how to what is like the most appropriate way to section them off. But I think having more beams is always more of a technical issue than having less. So I decided we'll assume that there are 5 beams, and that's why because you're moving between them, it's really difficult to navigate them. So that's why I sort of made sure that the contours stayed within those sections. And also in terms of like definite pitch, I didn't want definite pitch. I wanted just contours. So I specified, and the really confusing thing about it is because you're basically playing everything back to front. So you'd think that the higher notes are on your right hand side and the lower notes on the left. So I had to really specifically say use left hand, use right hand to show that you were actually going, lower, higher, because otherwise it would get really confusing. So yeah, so it was like, I think in terms of pitching, it was largely to do with the technique. So I specified which hands to use rather than which notes to play, and I created different levels of ambiguity through the different types of staves. So there were 5-line staves, 4-line staves, 3-line staves, things like that, just to sort of vary it a little bit.
That's really interesting. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question, Eliorah.
Yeah.
I was wondering, because you use the analogy and the metaphor of the clock movement and so on, did you have occasion to have a look or study some of the clock movements or some of the old, because, it's one of my interests. I actually do some work on some clocks from the 18th century and 19th century. And the mainsprings, when you go in and start working with them, some of the sounds that you get, some of the resonance and so on, is quite similar to some of the items from your composition. So I was wondering if you had occasion to actually, experiment or go into clocks or observe any clocks and listen to any clocks, and if that created any impetus for you to move in a certain direction.
Yeah, it was actually the source of the inspiration, really, to be honest. Like the entire piece was based on the actual a diagram of a clock that I'd been reading this article in a journal about time. The whole journal was about time, and one of the articles was about these clocks and the mechanism. And I was just totally fascinated by the way you have different wheels of different sizes moving at the same time. And it was that idea of that gave me the idea of creating cross rhythms and isorhythms that move at different paces. So it's really interesting that it actually, you can hear that. So I'm really happy that that came across, because yeah, it was, I almost mathematically followed some of the things that I found out from that article about how it's actually constructed, because that was one of my main inspirations for writing it in the first place.
Excellent.
Thank you, Eliorah, for sharing your piece. That was great. I wish I could play the recording, the final performance, but I got the flu and I think I had a corona and now it wasn't so bad time. Uh, but we just need to go for the next composer, Ruta.
Yeah, so I'll just make you host.
Oh yeah, I just want to share my score, so maybe you don't need to. Okay, you made me host. Fine. All right. So I'll just introduce myself in a couple of sentences. So I am Ruta Vikauskaite. It's a Lithuanian name. Yeah, very long. We have long names in Lithuania. So I do live in the UK. I finished my doctoral degree at the Royal Academy in London, and now I live in Scotland, but I'm calling actually from Austria, so I'm all over the place basically. And yeah, I'm just a freelancer composer, actually living a bit of a dream life, period of a dream life. Don't know how long it will last, but we'll see. So the piece that I wanted to show is a piece for bass drum solo. I'll show you the score in a minute, but I just wanted to say that as a composer, I work very collaboratively. I mean, I'm quite known for being very collaborative person, and I normally do write classical scores fully notated and everything is very precise, but the process that leads to that score, I try to meet with my performers before even I have any ideas, and we have meetings, number of meetings at chats, and trying things out halfway through, and basically the piece builds out from this collaboration. It kind of falls together at the end. And so with this piece, it was a commissioned, it is one of those pieces that I didn't know who will perform it. It was commissioned by the Royal Academy, and it was supposed to become a part of their publication that will be played by students in the universities. So I don't really ever write for pieces like this for publication, you know. I write for people and I work with people. So this was a bit of an unusual thing for me. But I went through my usual collaborative process with a few people. So first I met Jake, oh goodness, sorry. Yeah, Jake Brown was first. And he showed me lots of things on bass drum, and then I experimented at home myself. And then I had George Dunbar, who kind of played it for me when I've written it. And then I had Jude Carlton, who proof checked my notation one more time, because writing for percussion is a bit like it's not like writing for piano or violin. I mean, there isn't a one standard way of writing percussion music or bass drum music. So I had lots of questions, and so all of them were answered. And so I had this piece, which is, as you see, is extremely precisely notated. The idea is based on the rhythms of Indian konakol. So there is even like a quote, like these few bars is a quote, and this is just my kind of interpretation, let's say. And so I play between those rhythms and between different mallets and different timbres on the bass drum until it goes into this section, which is a bit more of a spell section. Initially, it also had a time signature and bar lines and everything, but I had to remove it because playing with Super Bowl, which is this, you can't, it's very hard to control, and you don't know when the sound will come out. So I had to remove and leave it a bit more ad libitum, but it's still very, very, like, you know, it's kind of very precise score. And so this middle section is, I asked the percussionist to walk around the bass drum and sing some very specific singing things, and then whisper. It becomes like a bit of a spell. It becomes like a bit more of a shamanic drum, and then it goes into playing bow on the mallet, on the stick of the mallet, and then finally it goes back into rhythm and big grand finale. So called. So so it was, it was written, and it would be a normal piece if not the percussionist who kind of picked it up, and she practiced it. So I just had premiere of this actually 3 days ago, I think. And so she picked it up and she was practicing it, and we had a few conversations, and I think she very quickly realized that I'm a very nice collaborative person. So she started to have her own suggestions, and she had many. A few of them I put into the score, but she had many. And then basically when it was nearing the concert, she and her teacher, she's still a student at the Royal Academy, so she and her teacher, they both decided that she should play it from memory, which meant that it's not going to be played as it's written, because it was way too short time for her to memorize it. And also, I mean, I just basically, so I had to make this decision for myself, because even though I'm a very collaborative composer, once I put things on score, it's kind of a final for me, I don't really edit my scores. And I was really feeling a bit of a discomfort, because it was either let her go free with this or actually put her into this frame. And so I did hear the piece. She played it for me as it's written, bits, not continuously, but in bits. And then I knew that the piece works as it's written, doesn't need to, it doesn't necessarily need extra interpretation from the performer. But then I kind of thought, okay, well, how about I just let her do this her own way? And yeah, I thought actually it's she doesn't perform much of what's written, even though she did learn it in the first place. So she performs it from her memory. But I thought the result was brilliant actually, and I'm just going to play it. Actually, if Simon could play it, I'm going to make you host. Simon, if you could just play it from minute 46, I think, with your good sound. Thank you.
That was so lovely, Ruta. Are there any questions? So I really I have some questions actually, if that's okay. There's a really beautiful, haunting moment, like where you burn the wood, and I was just wondering. To me, it really sounds like sort of like a voice that's being teased out of the instrument. It just sounds so human, like it's weird, like it sounds like a voice. And I was just wondering whether has anything to do with the title Buried Chants, as if like it's coming out like the chant, or is that just my imagination? It's not intended at all.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. It's like the thing is that it's a bit hard to predict what kind of sound there will be from it. Really depends on the mallet, very much on the drum and on the acoustics and on the bow and on how the percussionist will play it. So it's like too many factors really. It's not like violin, you can predict what sound will be this. It's but it's there was I think what I wanted to, it was like this middle section was like there had to be some kind of pitch, very slight appearance of pitch in there, and so that's why I kind of asked her to sing a little, just a little with her voice, and this kind of bowing was kind of this emergence of like as if there is some kind of pitch in this drum. There was also I was trying to add some pitch with her playing with the elbow, if you saw, but she actually didn't, because she was doing this memory thing. She actually didn't play. There were a few places where she had to kind of do this, but yeah, I think you got it right. Probably there was this. The chant was coming from this middle section. Yeah, it's just
so beautiful. Thank you.
I have a question for Ruta.
Okay.
I really enjoyed this piece. I have to confess, I'm not aware of your work. What other pieces for other media or other combination of instruments or voice or whatever have you composed?
I've composed many, you see.
Give me an example.
I composed. I don't know. I write music for orchestral instruments. So I think I have a bit of a practice with percussion, because I wrote a piece which was for percussion and symphony orchestra, and the percussionist does play a bit of section of that piece on the bass drum, in combination with timpani, which sounds really cool. Actually, yeah, it's also yeah. I actually don't have the video online, but that was nice. But also I do kind of, I like experimenting with. I've written like string quartets and things like this as well, if you ask me. But I think from quite early on, from my study period, especially in Lithuania, I kind of lean towards writing for a bit more unusual combinations and for unusual instruments, just because it was in Lithuania we didn't have a set program for composers. So when I was studying, I would need to find my own performers, and it would be quite often that maybe a harp player would really want to have a new music piece, but not the violin player. They, they have so much repertoire already. And then, so one of my first pieces I've written was a piece for marimba solo. Actually, this is quite unusual, because the guy just really wanted to have a piece. So yeah, different things. I think when I came to UK and I was studying my doctoral in the UK, I was forced to write a bit more standard combinations, like piano solo, string quartets, and things like this. But I mean, I've written last year for 6 guitars piece, which was also really I do I do like to explore a bit more unusual instruments.
Well, thank you. I have a request to all of you composers. If you can send me emails with links where I could actually hear some of your compositions. These days in which we are forced to stay home, that would be a wonderful way of being aware of what young composers are doing today. And I personally am very interested. So I don't know how to go about giving you my email, but I'm sure we can figure it out. But I would be very interested in all of you sending me links.
Yeah, in the newsletter, we always put the links and any information like that about the composers in the newsletter, so you can find out everything from there.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Sven.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you. It's a very nice piece, and if I take on the side the technical point of view of your piece, from a storytelling point of view, I had the image of an action cue, like in a movie, because of the patterns you used, and in the middle of it, when she started to sing, it was like a ritual actually, and there is actually a story, but maybe it's just personal, like how your piece is evocative to me, what kind of images is it telling me, and I really like that when a piece is doing that. So well done. And my question is actually very simple, because the video was a bit laggy. I was noticing she used something on her fingers. And what was that actually?
Oh yeah, they are called, what are they called? Hold on a minute. It's something you use for sewing, you know?
Thimbles? Isn't they called thimbles?
Thimbles, yeah, exactly. Thimbles, yeah. That's it. And this actually is not my original idea. There is a composer, Gabriel Prokofiev, in the UK, who is quite well known, and he's written something for. He's written some kind of drum piece, and I saw it on YouTube, and I kind of stole the thimbles idea from him. So I confess.
Okay, nice. But it's not for bass drum originally, or is it?
No, they are not. They are, yeah, it's not a bass drum thing.
Okay.
It's for sewing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Are there any more questions?
Hello, I've got one. Ruta, thank you so much for your presentation. Everyone's presentations today have been so inspiring, and it's been absolutely amazing to be able to check out so many new pieces and new perspectives. It's been lovely. Thank you so much also to Eliorah and Atafif for organising this. It's been so great. Thank you so much. Ruta, my question for you, I guess, is a bit more of a philosophical one, I guess. It kind of goes back to what Ruben was talking about to Simon with regards to kind of ownership and what is the most kind of accurate, so to speak, performance. So you mentioned that this piece, two things. Firstly, this piece was kind of written whilst your practice, as you mentioned, is very kind of collaborative. You like to work with a performer. This piece was written particularly like for publication rather than for this specific performance. I guess my question to you is, where do you see kind of the most authentic form of this performance, particularly with your performer also like having to memorize the piece prior to the initial performance? Which version do you see as the most authentic? If you do, you don't have to. I could be talking rubbish, and that's okay too.
Yeah, I'm really, I mean, to be totally honest, I'm a bit of, I think I'm a bit of quite a control freak, really, in some places. I think for me, it was difficult to listen to her performance, hearing every single thing that she's not playing right. I was feeling a massive discomfort. But then I thought we did have a conversation. It was a mutual agreement. You see, she didn't just, just took my piece and kind of, but she kind of made her point, because she said that she can do so much more if she owns this music. You see, she can do so much more, and she can really make it became like evoking ritual for her, to evoke this piece into some kind of life. And I thought, okay, fine. I mean, because it wasn't a careless kind of, she didn't just carelessly misremember the piece. It more was her, she really worked on it very hard. And I thought it's fair enough. And I mean, I thought it was great. I don't know how much it's my piece anymore. Just this type of question, because I think everybody congratulating me, but I think it's kind of Joanna, she deserves the credit because she's done the work. But I don't know how to ask. I kind of, you see, because I did write it for publication. It's out of my hands now. I don't know what's going to happen. I would like to hear the version that's played as it's written, maybe sometime, but it might be just, if it's just boring academic playing the right notes thing, it's not going to be the same effect, is it? So I don't know where I stand.
Yeah, I get that completely. Like, it's the difference between playing the notes and performing the piece. I think there is a distinction between the two. I'm sorry, this is going to be a bit of a ramble. I'm reminded of something that Russian composer Polina Korobkova said to me in an interview, that when the moment one of her scores was finished, she relinquished ownership of that piece the moment it was passed on. Like, she no longer had anything to do with what would happen following that the performers had basically complete agency, and she didn't own it outside of her name being on there. Like, she was nothing but like her name in comparison to that. Sorry, that just came into my head regarding what you've just said. I think it's just, there's a lot of things to be talked about there.
Yeah.
May I add something? I like what you said, Ruta. It's also very interesting if we hear performances, the composer himself or herself performing the same piece, and how actually quite different those performances are. A typical case comes to mind is Rachmaninoff, the various recordings of his piano concertos he did himself. There are so many differences. I don't think anyone is going to argue that he certainly knew what he was writing, and he certainly knew the piece, but he managed to be different in different occasions. So again, it goes back to the original question that you were referring to, and I asked, what is the perfect performance? My personal answer is there is no such a thing. But of course, I'm willing to listen to anyone who argues differently, But I like, Ruta, what you were saying about you wanting to keep control of the piece, and what you were saying about a different approach. Once the piece is finished, the composer relinquishes control of it. It's a balance. I am not a composer. I tried composing in my teen years, and I realized that it sounded good, but whatever I was writing, someone else had said it before better. But as a performer, my goal is to try to get into the mind of the composer and try to figure out what he or she wants that to sound. And it's a continuous and continuing process for any piece for me. Thank you.
Yeah, it's I think I find it very, how to say, if you did say something about the time, how time changes it. So for me, it's like, I think that when the piece is very, very fresh, I feel so much ownership after every note I've written, because I thought about it so much. And then in a few months, or even if I wrote some music in between, I really forget, you know, and I'll listen to the same performance and I will not, like, it will be a different thing for me. I will not feel so much ownership of my score, and I probably would be able to enjoy it much more and not care about it. It's not precisely performed the way it's written. I think for me, I sometimes time goes by and embarrassingly I forget my pieces, and then I hear them play and I think, this sounds familiar, what is this, you know? and then I realized that was a bit of my piece. I mean, maybe I have just some memory problems, but I think it's just because you can't hold so much music in your memory. I mean, just constantly working on music, new things, and then, you know, a few years later, it's just impossible. Not in my memory, certainly.
Well, I think the performance also depends on who you are as a person, the mood you are in, and what kind of character you have. And that's interesting because then you can have different types of performance within your piece. And then you can have what you like about, you know, you can take from someone else performing your piece what you like about them, and then you can add to that to your piece. So you are kind of building up every time. So it's always evolving, I think, and that's the beauty of composition, because it's never fixed, it's never perfect, but it's always changing.
If I may also make a comment, I think I can't imagine a percussionist coming up with that on their own, if that makes any sense. I really think that even if there's little accuracy in the actual performance, at the end of the day, the art is in creating something that inspires the performer to the extent that they can create, you know, this recording, because it's phenomenal. It's really unique and really interesting, and I don't think at the end of the day it would have been possible without this composition, because this composition has inspired the performer in ways that probably would not have, you know, ever been possible without it. So I definitely, you know, I think that's something worth bearing in mind, perhaps.
Just a little question. I wonder, Ruta, if you're working very closely and collaboratively with the performance is kind of an issue of Sven reminded me of something. It's kind of the idea of, well, if you write for an instrument, you write with something that can do these pitches, can play these has these characteristics, and but if you're writing with a performer, then you're writing for a person who has these characteristics and these abilities and these the way they are. So you're not really, there isn't really a line between the performer and the instrument. It's sort of what they can do. Is that kind of the I don't know if you didn't have any difficulty writing because it's an excellent piece, but is that the kind of the difficulty that you were discussing? What you felt a bit not quite so comfortable about? Does that make sense?
Yeah, because for this piece I didn't have a particular performer and personality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I kind of I sometimes I manage to overcome this a little, because, like, let's say when I play violin myself, and if I write violin music, I'm currently writing a piece for violin and I don't know who will play it, but I don't have a problem with this because I kind of write for myself. So I think with this bass drum piece, I was kind of writing a little bit for myself, because I also have a very bad bass drum at home, really. I can't really play it anyway. I was playing this piece, so I kind of, yeah, I try to write it for that is comfortable for me and that I feel performing it. And it's of course it's a bit harder when you write something like, for, let's say, accordion. You know, I don't have accordion and I can't play it, and it would be really difficult for me to write for something like accordion without actually having a player there, or some kind of other complex instruments that, like harp, I don't know, things like this. You like, or guitar. I have at home a guitar, but I can't play a thing on it, and yeah, that would be difficult for me.
Yeah, it just reminded me of when I wrote a solo viola piece, and basically it just came out of chatting with him a little bit, and we sort of talked about things we like and stuff we do, and I see he's this kind of person, and I can imagine him being like this on the stage with the viola, and then so rather than okay, the viola has these characteristics, it's like this is the sort of sound that he's going to produce like that. So it reminded me of that.
Yeah, I think I agree. I mean, if the performer is sometimes performer can really influence the piece. I had collaborations where performers would kind of just come up with fantastic idea that would be like the main thing in the piece, you know, like just really somehow it would like build like this, and then yeah, I kind of see myself as sometimes idea synthesizer and put the things into form and on the score.
That's composition.
Composer, putting things together.
I think we should probably, we're running over time, so we should probably start wrapping up. So I just like to thank everyone for coming today, because it's really great that you're supporting this, and new composers and continuing, contemporary composition. It's just so important, especially now, when it's so hard to sort of access this without concerts happening. So thank you so much for supporting it, and also thank you to Simon and Ruta, amazing composers, for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure to hear, an honour to hear from you. So and of course, thanks to all the performers who aren't necessarily with us, but thank you so much for performing these pieces. So just a few heads up on what's coming up next with the Avazad duo. In addition to the Composers Forum, we've launched an online workshop titled Music and Colours, which is a live music and art event which focuses on the concept of experiential art, using music to guide your creative instinct. So it's really to help you, inspire you in ways that are just very new and just sort of take you out of your comfort zone. And that I've found personally have really helped me to just open up and sort of build on my imagination as a composer and artist as well. So so in these workshops, we demonstrate how to use various art materials and create various effects during the performance of the Santo improvisation, which is performed by Atafe. And it's just an incredibly unique experience, and the results are often very, very interesting and crazy and strange. So yeah, I really recommend checking it out. You can have a look at our events page on our website, avazad.com. And yeah, finally, also, if you have any feedback about your experience this evening, please get in touch. We're always really welcome. We always really welcome your feedback and your advice. So our email address is atafeeliorah@gmail.com. Atafe, if you could put that in the chat, that would be really helpful. We would also appreciate it if you share it with friends and family, because we'd like to get as many people involved in the forum as possible, and as it would help us to widen the audience that we reach and give our composers more exposure. Again, thanks for joining us. we look forward to seeing you next month, which I believe will be, so the next forum will be the 6th of June, I believe. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thank you for
Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye to you all.
Bye.
Bye.